5 months, Wisconsin went from electing Donald Trump to electing a liberal to the state Supreme Court. Wisconsin Democratic Party Chair Ben Wikler is here to explain. Welcome back to Defending Democracy. I'm Marc Elias. Let's get started. Ben Wikler, welcome back to Defending Democracy.
Great to be with you. This is a terrible time, but it's also a moment where there's actually hope in the world, and that feels really good.
Yeah, it is. It is a moment where there's hope in the world. You know, within a 24-hour time period, we had Senator Booker on the Senate floor breaking Strom Thurmond's record for a filibuster for the longest Senate speech, and Democrats in Wisconsin scored a major victory in a state judicial election that is technically nonpartisan, but which the two parties lined up. So maybe you can tell us about the second one. I think we all saw Senator Booker's stamina, but tell us what happened in Wisconsin.
So Wisconsin has Supreme Court races 7 out of the 10 years in any decade. Sometimes there's sleepy affairs. These are officially nonpartisan. Sometimes they're enormously consequential for our state because sometimes the majority is at stake. This was one of those times, an open seat with a retiring progressive justice that if conservatives took it over, they would get the majority and they could re-gerrymander Wisconsin just as surely as the North Carolina Republican Supreme Court majority re-gerrymandered that state. So for the state legislative lines, for Republicans with dreams of locking in their congressional gerrymander for the U.S. House and locking in their House majority, so that the House majority is on the line, voting rights in Wisconsin can affect U.S. Senate races and presidential races. And Wisconsin tips the entire country in presidential races. So the House, the Senate, the presidency, if you add those together, it's the U.S. Supreme Court, all those things affected by Wisconsin state Supreme Court races. And given those stakes, we came ready for a huge fight to support our amazing candidate, Susan Crawford. Susan Crawford is a former judge, prosecutor, as a current judge, former prosecutor, attorney who represented workers and Planned Parenthood in court, a case called Planned Parenthood versus Brad Schimmel and voting rights. On the other side, Brad Schimmel, who's on the other side of the Planned Parenthood versus Brad Schimmel's case. He is a movement mega conservative, kind of hyper-partisan warrior, former attorney general under Scott Walker. And he used his position as attorney general to constantly sue to try to destroy the Affordable Care Act and lock in gerrymandering, lock in voter suppression, lock in union busting, a lot else. And he decided that his path to victory was nationalizing the race. He said over and over, he needs 60% of the people who voted for Trump. To get there, as he put it, he had to buy knee pads so he could crawl around on the ground begging, please, 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 to the biggest Republican donors in the country. Elon Musk answered. Elon Musk decided to make this his giant priority, poured more than $26 million into the race. We don't know the final number because we don't know how many people he bribed with his $100 donations to sign his petition. But he made this essentially a proxy battle on Trump and Musk. And Susan Crawford fought back. She said on the campaign trail, I never thought growing up as a little girl in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, I'd be up against the richest man in the world. And people who did not like the idea that the richest man in the world would buy our democracy, they got fired up. They got fired up to support Susan Crawford. In the end, Schimmel hit his goal. He got 60% of the people who voted for Trump, actually more than that, 62% to vote for him. But Susan Crawford and the pro-democracy forces, a gigantic alliance of just about everyone who believes in democracy and justice and a country that works for everyone, together inspired vastly more people to vote for Susan Crawford than had ever voted for any candidate for Supreme Court in the history of Wisconsin. She got not only enough votes to win by 10 percentage points, she got enough votes to beat Scott Walker in the governor's race in 2010, 14, or 18. She blew the roof off with turnout. And what we saw in that race is a repudiation of the idea that the richest man in the world, that Elon Musk or that Trump and his MAGA kind of henchmen can just break our democracy and buy key positions in states. And this means that 2026, even as dark as things have gotten, we have an enormous opportunity to win elections across the country. So that is the win in Wisconsin, a blowout victory against everything the far right could throw at the state of Wisconsin, a repudiation of the oligarchy and a reaffirmation through Susan Crawford in the idea of a democracy and the rule of law.
Okay, so you are not just the state party chair, you're also a very, very astute observer of American politics, both within Wisconsin and outside. And the thing that immediately jumped off the table or jumped off the screen, I guess, when I first saw it on election night was not that Susan Crawford won. I kind of expected her to win. Maybe you didn't, or you were cautiously optimistic. I thought she'd win, but was the margin, right? Because Donald Trump won in 2024 by just under 30,000 votes. Senator Baldwin, Democrat, won by just under 30,000 votes. So we're just going to call it a 60,000 vote swing between the two candidates. And that represents, as I going off the top of my head, you may tell me I'm wrong, just under 5%. In other words, from the Trump to Trump won by about 0.2 by about 0.2%. Baldwin won by about 0.2%. So there's about a half point swing between them. How do you make sense of a 10-point blowout? Like that seems pretty ahistoric. I don't think Joe Biden came any place near that. I don't think Donald Trump definitely did not in 2016. Ron Johnson didn't in his last Senate race. So I'm trying to understand, to what extent is this anomalous? Is this because of the candidates, because of Elon Musk, because of the time, because of turnout? Like how do you digest it in a state that is notoriously close in its elections?
So 5 of the last 7 presidential races here have come down to less than 1 percentage point. Trump and Biden and Trump again, and Gore and John Kerry in 2004. 2012, Barack Obama was nowhere near double digits. I think he was just in the 2008 absolute landslide. This is deeply unusual, with one caveat, which is we won by double digits also in this last 2 Supreme Court races. In fact, 3 of the last 4. So there's this thing in Supreme Court races where we're able to win by more over these last 4 years. That said, turnout is usually way lower. So the Republican theory that they could juice turnout and they could win, if they had gotten as many votes as they did in 2024, in 2023 or 2020 or 2018, they would have won. Brad Schimmel got more votes than any Republican candidate for Supreme Court has ever gotten, other than Susan Crawford this time. And we've had close races in that dimension as well. We've had 2 races under half a percentage point in 2019 and 2011 for state Supreme Court in Wisconsin. So those are super close. But what we saw, to me, is kind of a 3-layer phenomenon. The first is our candidate. Susan Crawford embodied the idea of integrity and justice and the rule of law in a way that allowed the message to totally resonate with the choices people had in front of them. If you're making the case that the other side is, partisan extremist, puts their thumb on the scale, wants to ban abortion, wants to, do whatever Trump and Musk want to do, corrupt, then you need someone who is a ramrod, like straight integrity, backbone, like conviction, and a clear record of public service throughout her life. That's what Susan Crawford was, and she conveyed that expertly, and her campaign was just superb. Especially, like, abortion was the biggest issue for voters coming out of the polls, and she made such a clear contrast on that all the way through. She fought the other guy to a standstill on public safety, and she made this great argument about Musk and Trump. So the first thing is the candidate and campaign. The second thing is Elon Musk himself showing up and making this about him. That was a disaster for the GOP. Like, he is not as popular as Trump with Republicans. He is just as hideously unpopular with Democrats, and he is more unpopular than Trump with Republicans. So, independents. And so he's someone who, by putting a cheese head on his head and handing out $1 million checks, and doing this giant live stream event, he made this really vividly a question of whether Wisconsin could be bought in a way that, and what he's doing to Social Security and the Veterans Administration, and so many things people count on and rely on. Handing out checks with one hand while you rip apart things that people care about with the other hand is not a recipe for political success. It looks like a slap in the face. So he helped us too, even though he put in more money than any donor's ever given in any political campaign. And I think the campaign and all the allies and partners did a great job of highlighting how terrible he is to voters in a way that made his intervention backfire. The third thing, though, is that I think we identified, we're able to channel, and hugely benefited from a white-hot volcano of rage in the electorate. People are furious about what's happening. And if you as a candidate are a vehicle for people who want to fight back against this administration to be able to do that, then you can surf a wave and win elections. If this had been Wisconsin's the ultimate purple state, we're 50-50. If this was a R+9 state, then Susan Crawford still would have won. You know what I mean? If you have a 10-point swing, and that adds a whole bunch of states as possibilities to the mix. This is the electorate is so mad. And you could see that in the streets on Saturday. You could see that in the 5 million people marching, including tens of thousands of people across Wisconsin. And you could see that at the ballot box, that people knew that they were fighting back in this moment of crisis against an administration that is totally outside the law and the Constitution. It's threatening the foundations of our democracy. And becoming, I think for candidates everywhere, you want to become a vehicle for people who think that what is happening now is fundamentally wrong and who want to be able, a way to express that and change it. And Susan Crawford, on top of her extraordinary attributes as a campaigner and as a candidate, she became a kind of icon for people who thought that we should be better than this as a country and wanted to make that absolutely clear with their votes. And that, that last part especially, it gives me just enormous hope for what's possible in these next few years in a moment when hope is so hard to come by.
I'll be right back with more of my conversation with Ben Wikler in a moment. Independent quality news about the state of democracy and how the Trump administration is attacking voting rights is more important now than ever before. So please make sure you're up to date with Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters. Sign up at the link above or in the show notes below. Yeah, so I got to ask you one more question about the sort of the mechanics of this. And I understand you're probably going to tell me you won't have complete information until all of the results are posted in the voter file and you've done analysis. But I saw a very interesting map. I think it may have been the Washington Post that showed like the map of Wisconsin with little lines that showed directionally whether red or blue, and it again surprised me because I expected to see essentially Dane County like through the roof and Milwaukee through the roof, and then the red areas either muted or slightly red because, as you say, turnout was up across the board. But it was really sort of it seemed to be, at least just off that one chart, sort of statewide that Democrats overperformed. Was there not a unique overperformance in the traditional Democratic areas? Was this about the red areas getting more Democratic, or you were going to say at 10 points it was all of the above?
So it varied from county by county, but it didn't vary systematically. This was a across the board rejection of what Trump and Musk are doing and what Brad Schimmel, the kind of corruption and MAGA extremism that he represents, and across the board, a sign of energy for people who agree with Susan Crawford and the values that she represents. We gained vote share in every county in the state. We added turnout to 2023 in every county in the state, in red and blue and purple counties alike. Western Wisconsin, which is where Derek Van Orden, the Republican congressman, hails from, and where he didn't overperform. Trump overperformed there last year. That snapped back especially. So this is the map comparing the 2024 elections to this one. Western Wisconsin just whooshed towards Crawford, towards the Democratic endorsed candidate. Derek Van Orden's days in Congress are just very clearly numbered if you look at that kind of energy. Midterms are different from general elections. You can't project a straight line from this to the presidential in 28, but this is very likely to predict what happens in 26, especially if we keep organizing, keep communicating everywhere. That those voters, again, they're enough to win every midterm governor's race that's ever happened in the state of Wisconsin. We had them in the Supreme Court race. Those voters are going to turn out again in 2026. There's no way they demobilize. Maybe the right mobilizes more, but they have so far to go. And I think we're going to beat those numbers in 2026. I think the level of fury is going to be almost impossible to contain. So this, you're right that turnout did go up in Republican areas, but it went up even more among Democrats, even in Republican areas. And so that's how you see red areas swing blue. There's a slight correlation between the size of the relative size of the Democratic electorate and the overperformance. And what that basically says is Democrats turned out in massively higher numbers. The Schimmel got 62% of Trump's vote. Crawford got 78% of Harris's vote. And wow. Which is, again, for an off-year Supreme Court election, that's not supposed to be how it happens. But that is happening. And so many of those voters came out and protested just a few days later on April 5th. There's a wave that's rising in this country.
Yeah, so I mentioned you're an astute observer, not just of Wisconsin politics, but American politics. And that's where I'm going next. Essentially, or not essentially, at the same time that you were having your election, there were a couple of special elections for House. And I also took notice that in Florida, that a district that Trump had won by 30 points only went 15 points for the Republican candidate. And Hakeem Jeffries noted afterwards that there are 60 Republicans in the House who represent districts where Trump did worse than 15 points. And he said all of them will now be targeted. Talk to me about, you've mentioned now sort of energy and anger and again, I realize these are data points in isolation, but it does seem like whether it's red areas or blue areas, urban or suburban or exurban or rural, there does seem to be a enthusiasm right now among Democrats, and I experience it the same way you do, which is that it is as much anger as it is anything else.
Yes. Yeah. So classically, in psychology, there are positive emotions that are energy generating, and there's negative emotions. Sorrow, grief, these are negative emotions. When you want to curl up in a fetal position, um, you're not energized to do things. Anger is a positive emotion. It is
Hmm.
a state of arousal. It is an energized state where you're trying to, you don't like what's happening and you want to do something about it. And there's anger in the electorate that I think it's connected to patriotism. It's connected to a belief that the country should be better than this, and fury at just kind of feeling punched in the face by a political system that is absolutely failing us in every dimension, economically, making throwing us into a completely needless recession while shooting costs up for everybody, and at the level of democracy and freedom, and disappearing people and everything else that's happening right now. Um, what we can see in every number and indicator that we're tracking is that the people that are pissed off by this include both the high information Democrats and high information voters who find these abrogations of our Constitution and democracy a deeply personal affront, and the kind of relatively low information people who don't pay much attention to politics, that who might think about other things, who basically wanted to bring costs down, who voted for a change economically and are getting the wrong direction of change. So that's a really powerful coalition. If everybody's pissed off, then you wind up seeing swings, against the party in power, which is the Trump administration, that will cross geography, cross gender, generation, race, ethnicity. There's no group that is getting, more fired up, demographically or geographically, to support this administration. It's not like red's getting redder and blue's getting bluer. Everybody is mad, and they should be mad. And they also get that you can channel that anger into electoral work, into voting and removing the people in power. Lately, for the last several cycles, we've had this pretty unusual phenomenon of chambers of the legislature and the presidency changing hands over and over and over. But people are not confused right now about the power of their vote, that they can throw out whoever's there if they don't like what they're getting. And what Trump is doing is so far outside the bounds of political malpractice. It is so much worse than the first Trump administration, which is saying a lot. It is so much worse than anything even Biden's worst critics ever experienced under Biden. I think that there's going to be a wholesale rejection, and I think it's most likely to be more like 2006, 2008, a multi-cycle. This is not two different electorates; it's both electorates who are furious about what they're seeing from Trump and from Musk. The last thing I'll say in this: the way to survive if you're a Republican in this environment is to tack hard against this administration, to be seen as a Republican dissident who sees how bad it is, who pushes back, who tries to do discharge petitions, who has the courage to stand up to things that are hurting regular folks in your district. I don't see any of that from
No,
Republicans right now.
no,
Nobody. And
no.
that means they are going along for the ride. They've lashed themselves to a sinking ship. And
That's
while
right.
I'd love to see courage from the GOP side, if people are unwilling to stand up and say what is obvious to everyone before their eyes, that this administration is a flaming disaster that is shredding the Constitution and setting the economy on fire, if Republicans aren't willing to do that, then they will lose, and they deserve to lose.
Absolutely. And look, there is not a single courageous Republican in either the House or the Senate. There are a few of them that over the years tried to sell themselves that way, but just look at the confirmation votes in the Senate for the worst of the worst nominees. Look at what the House did with the budget bill that they passed out there. Donald Trump long ago purged any independent thinking Republicans, and the handful that may have stayed, they've just thrown in with him. So there is not a piece of cartilage, no less spine, to be found anywhere in the Republican Party in Capitol Hill. I do have to ask you a direct question about Elon Musk. So um, I sense this in myself. I sense it in the electorate. I sense it in listening to you talk about this. An incredible anger towards Elon Musk, and I've tried to ask myself why that is. Why is it that I am so contemptuous of him? I mean, there are a lot of people to be contemptuous of in the Republican Party and who are sycophants for Donald Trump. Why him? And so it could be because he's a billionaire and he's throwing his money around. That's one possibility why the electorate is responding so badly. I tend to think that's not it, because there have been other very rich people who have been involved in politics, including, by the way, some conservative big money people in Wisconsin itself. The second is that he represents the worst of the Trump administration, Doge, and the callousness, the cruelty. The third is that there's something of a betrayal. He started an electric car company. People became excited about electric cars because they were good for the environment, and now he has gone the other way. I'm just curious if you have a theory for why he is so hated in so many quarters of not just the Democratic Party, but he's not even popular among Republicans or independents.
Well, the first and biggest thing is that he is reaching into people's lives and hurting them, attacking them. The attacks on everything, Social Security, on basic science, on cancer research, again, on veterans, on the postal service, on services that, in rural areas and suburb cities, everywhere, small towns, people rely on the government to do certain things. And he's messing that up. There's the old, if you're not interested in politics, it's interested in politics, maybe interested in you. Well, Elon Musk is interested in messing up everyone's lives, even if they don't want to ever think about it. He is intrusive. The way he took over X and made it basically a propaganda platform for himself, he's also doing with the federal government, showing up and then going and ripping up things that people rely on. So the fact that he's the world's richest man who's using this to enrich himself at the expense of everybody else, while also trying to buy and break and hack our political system in the most cynical possible way, he's like a cartoon supervillain. It is very specific to him, because he's gone so far on each dimension beyond what we've ever seen before. And he's become an embodiment of the thing that enrages people about a system, a government, a political system that is supposed to respond to what the public wants and needs, and instead is responding to the whims that are clearly whims of one maniacal man. Now, I think that Trump enjoys the idea that Elon Musk could be a heat shield for him, but I think he's making a kind of category error there, because people really get that Musk is doing all this with the full support of Donald Trump, at the behest of Donald Trump. And I think it's good for the world if Trump fires Elon Musk, but I don't think it solves Trump's political problems. He's going to own the damage done by what's happening right now for a long time to come. The huge wait times for Social Security. We held town halls, people versus Elon Musk town halls across the state, and people would come up and talk about how they'd spent their life working in the Veterans Administration, and then their relatives, people they know, had just been fired, or they're on the chopping block waiting to find out. People who serve this country and want to honor those who served. There's no deeper betrayal. And that, he has set in motion a kind of rolling disaster that's going to extend for years until we have leadership in the federal government that wants it to make a government that actually responds and is effective and builds state capacity and actually supports people. Musk has broken it, and Trump owns it. So I think that's the level. It's not just the kind of distaste at some horrible person doing horrible things over on the side. It's that he's walking into our own homes and doing it to us.
Yeah. So since I've got the Democratic Party chair of Wisconsin, and right now everyone is freaking out, appropriately so, what Donald Trump is doing to our economy and absolutely destroying our economic future with these tariffs. Everyone on the coast, okay, and I'll just speak that sitting right now in Washington D.C. We keep looking to the heartland, and what is the perspective on these tariffs from the standpoint of if you live in rural Wisconsin, or in Milwaukee, or in Madison?
It's just an obvious, complete dumpster fire. This is a total disaster. There are sometimes people who want a tariff for a particular thing, to protect a particular industry, to help create some space for something to grow. That is a totally separate question. Right now, Trump is performing dentistry with Elon Musk's chainsaw on the economy. That is what is happening right now. And it is, people are terrified about it. People are talking about it everywhere. They hope to God that this is another thing where Trump, makes a big deal out of a terrible idea and then immediately backs away. But it seems like he's just going for it. And this is the beginning of what could be one of the worst economic catastrophes of our lifetime. In 2016, Trump won in part because, on top of racism and misogyny and so much else, in part because there was a regional recession happening in the upper Midwest, especially manufacturing was having a real dip. That was a real problem. and it affected people's lives. What Trump is doing right now will make that 1,000 times worse. We've had a resurgent economy in our neck of the woods. We have a lot to do to build more, but what Trump is doing, any factory that builds things, we have a ton of manufacturing in Wisconsin. They rely in part on our trading partners in Canada for the supplies that go into there. Like, when you're building something, you need to make it out of stuff, and we don't make all that stuff in the United States. So when you just jack up the prices of all of the factors of production, it makes it really hard to stay in business. And this is especially going to wipe out the small businesses that don't have the capital to reinvest and build new factories and figure out how to resource every one of the things that goes into their products. So this really, it is just deeply, impressively, horrendously bad. And I think we have to be prepared for some really tough times, but we have to think of this in a way as like one of those really dark times in American history, but on the other side, you get a chance to get it right again. And we're going to have to really think hard about how to make sure that when we rebuild our economy, when we rebuild our government, we actually do it on principles that allow us to endure, and to make sure someone like Donald Trump can never get elected again to cause this kind of damage and destruction. The election that just happened to me is a sign of hope that there's a hope electorally on the other side of this for people who actually believe in public service and something other than just looting for their personal gain. But we're in for a really dark time, and you can feel that across Wisconsin right now.
All right. So last question for you. Usually I end by asking you what you tell people who want hope, but you guys have a lot of hope. So I'm going to actually flip it on its head. And I'm going to ask you, you are someone who has the ear of governors and senators and state legislators, probably mayors as well. But if you were in a room full of people running for House or Senate or governor, not necessarily in Wisconsin, just generally, and they said, "All right, Ben, what did you learn that we need to know?" In other words, what's the thing that we elected officials who are candidates in 2026, what is the thing we need to take away from this that we may not know about our own political future?
Well, the first thing is expect that people are engaged, that they want to help. Give them something to do. Give people a way to channel their energy into helping you, because there's a torrent of energy around that. Show that you are fighting. There's a period where people were like, and then then they started seeing. They saw the way that Susan Crawford was campaigning and fighting, and they were energized by it. You want to get caught trying in this moment. It is better to be more vocal and take the fight to the other side, and be clear about the links between whoever you're running against and Musk and Trump in this moment than it is to shrink away. It can be easy to worry that you're going to awaken the beast on the other side, and
Right.
That they're going to come after you. Honestly, if they come after you, then that is going to backfire for them. So be bold. This is a moment for boldness. This is a moment for making the case. This is a moment to go everywhere. Sometimes Democrats can fall into just wanting to stay in their kind of comfort zone areas, but there are Democrats, there are potential Democrats, and there are Democrats, there are people who want to vote for you everywhere. So go everywhere in a way that Susan Crawford did, to her great credit. And a lot of the best politicians in purple states do. They campaign in the deep rural red areas as well as the purple and blue ones. This is absolutely the time for that. Make the case to the country, to the public. There are national donors. We had more than 200,000 people contribute to Susan Crawford's Supreme Court campaign. That is preposterous. And there's always this question: if you're running, a fundraising program, how wide do you go with trying to find people to help? Well, if you are in a meaningful fight, you can go really wide, and you're going to find people who are ready to throw down and get involved. Communicate in every possible medium. Just be extremely present as a communicator, and recognize that a lot of people in your state are watching national podcasts and streaming things. There are people tuning into to you, Mark, as you know, in Wisconsin. So go broad. It's not a time for shrinking violence. The other thing is recruit more people to run. I mean, if you're thinking about running, this is the moment to do it. This is the moment when districts that have been out of bounds will be in play, when seats that had been untouchable will be winnable for Democrats. No one will begrudge you for taking on a far-right candidate, even if you fall short. Republicans, I think, will probably have more money problems than Democrats in the end of the day, because there'll be so many fronts and so many fires they're trying to put out. We don't yet know whether Elon Musk is going to play everywhere in the way that he just played in Wisconsin. I hope that we disincentivized him. But another part of me hopes that he does get involved in every race, because once Elon Musk is on the in the picture, you really have a powerful villain an energizing villain to fight against. And of course, Trump endorsing your opponent. Schimmel in this race, he ran ads about Trump endorsing him. That was the most run ad across the state. He had it on TV. Trump, breaking news, Trump endorses Brad Schimmel. That energized our voters at least as much as it energized his. A huge share of voters said that they were sending a message to Trump with their vote for Susan Crawford. So I would say be not afraid is my fundamental thing. And in politics, you always have to run paranoid. You have to think about everything, the possibly thing that could go wrong. And you want to really take care to bring the fight to the issues that are most mobilizing to you and divide the other side and energize yours. All those things are still true. But this is a moment when I think politics reward bravery in the way that it did with Susan Crawford. I think there's a lesson there for the whole country.
Ben Wikler, we always have a lesson when we talk to you. We always learn something. We're always smarter for it at the end. Thank you for everything you did in this election as a lawyer who has litigated before the state Supreme Court. You listed some of the important things that have been protected. Ballot, I would add to that list, ballot drop boxes, preventing the possibility of election subversion in the future. And so much more. So thank you for everything you did there. And obviously, thank you for everything you've done for Wisconsin, for Democrats around the country, and for your great advice today.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Defending Democracy. Make sure you're subscribed to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters to stay informed on the latest voting rights and democracy news. We'll see you next time.